upwards. I've got a great guest today. It's going to be a it's quite a complex subject today, but if you think about our finances, think about our economy, now throughout history, a number of different currencies over time have dominated the world economy. And when World War II almost bankrupted the Great Britain, the United States dollar, only printed in 1914, took over from the pound sterling and became the world's reserve dominant currency. Now, this gives them huge power over the global economy and over us. They dictate how we run our banks. They demand to know where our money comes from, forcing us to prove we're not criminals. Oil is priced in US dollars. Major currencies are pegged to it, such as China, Hong Kong, Malaysia, and of course, our own EC dollar. Now, Russia and China have had enough. They've decided that they want to develop a new reserve currency. It's their turn, along with the BRICS nations. Now, my guest today is a former renewable energy executive. He says he's a reformed Washington, D.C. lobbyist, but now he's just a digital gypsy. He's based in Antigua, but he travels the world and he seeks out other nomadic entrepreneurs. Gary Aksamit, welcome to ZDK Radio.
Good morning, thank you.
It's great to see you here. Now, we've been talking over the last few days about the whole global economy and how it affects us all. But let us start. This all started with the article about Russia and China saying, we've had enough. We want to create a new reserve currency. We want the power from the Americans. So let's just go back a little bit. What is a reserve currency exactly?
A reserve currency basically is the go-to currency of transactions around the world. Now, you mentioned oil in your introduction. But what I perceive, and this is clearly just an intuitive perception on my part, this is going to be about food.
It's
this
interesting
is going to be about
that.
climate change.
Yeah.
Okay. Putin is looking at the lines of latitude on the map and realizing that the growing seasons are moving north. And let's be perfectly honest. Why did he go in the Ukraine? Is because now between the Ukraine and Russia, he controls 25% of the world's wheat crop.
So we're talking about the reserve currency, we're talking about money, but it's actually a lot deeper than that, isn't it? It's not really about that.
No. It is about control. Putin looks at this and says, so let's talk about the BRICS. Let's expand the food conversation a little bit. If you look at the BRICS nations are going to control about 40% of the world's global corn crop, and they're going to control about 60% of the global wheat crop.
Wow.
Yes. So here's how this is going to play out. You want our corn, you want our wheat, we do business in my currency.
Got it. Now, we're talking, of course, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And we know that Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia are thinking of joining the BRICS. So these are the main nations that we're talking about here, aren't we?
Yes.
And how do they work at the moment, then? They're all tied to the US dollars. How do they function at the moment?
At the moment right now, well, to explain how it doesn't work right now.
Yeah, that's a good better way of doing it.
So a few months back, Russia was basically negligent in paying some bond payments.
Yeah.
Okay? And I saw some economists who said, well, nobody's ever going to trust Russia again. And I really laughed at that.
Yeah. Do we trust Russia?
Well, no. But more importantly, it was basically Putin says, I've got your money. I'm just not going to do business in American dollars.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's kind of like the old rapper from back 20 years ago, ODB, who said, I got your money, baby. It's like, you want to play in my pond, you're going to play by my rules. That's what the reserve currency does for people. That's what it's done for the United States post-World War II. The problem is, well, post-World War II, we had Bretton Woods Agreement, which put everybody in the same pond to agree to the same terms of currency.
And that set out the framework on how it would all work, didn't it?
Absolutely. Well, because globalism left the building along with Lot and his two mules, you know what I'm saying? There's no unifying force. The IMF or the UN or whoever would like to be able to unify the globe and say, no, we're all going to do business in the same currency. What I see happening right now is that we're going to have an us against them. It's going to be a binary decision at some point in time. We don't know whether the U.S. dollar is going to continue to limp along and do business with a few of its trade partners, and the IMF might come up with something separate. We don't know. We don't know what's being cooked into this. irregardless, we're going to have a Western currency and an Eastern currency, and they're both going to be competing for business in the same pond. That to me is that's amazing. That I'm trying to wrap my mind around this little war of attrition, like you mentioned, Egypt and a few other countries who are contemplating joining the BRICS. Well, who else after that?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, if you're a country that is rich in natural resources, be it oil or, let's assume that oil over time is going to lose its influence, but specifically food.
Yeah.
Okay. If you're a country that's got a lot of food resources, you're going to look at China and go, wow, that's my market. So I'm going to quit doing business in dollars and I'm going to start doing business in the BRICS currency, the BRICS reserve currency.
But how will they meet in the middle? So you've got the East and the Western currency. And what happens when Russia let's dismiss Russia, China wants to trade with the US? Now the currency, we've suddenly got two different reserve currencies. How do they combine that and work interoperably?
Oh, and this is the one that I've done an immense amount of reading on. There's a term called, for the listeners, it's called interoperability.
Yep.
Okay, so this is going to not be, don't think of it in the terms of a piece of paper that is transacted. This is going to be something digital. So this digital currency, if you will, and let's not even call it a currency anymore, it's just a unit of measure.
Okay, yeah.
Nothing has been on the gold standard or the pound sterling, of course, for years and years. I mean, Switzerland was the last country to go off a gold standard over a decade ago. The point is now everything is backed by the full faith of somebody, the full faith of the United States government, the full faith, so on and so forth. So where this all segues into is one currency is going to be programmed one way, one currency is going to be programmed another way. I really see this as a currency war.
It's that severe, is it?
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
going back a little bit before we develop that, you talked about the gold standard. Now, we know that the US dollar, nothing is underpinned by gold anymore, very rarely. So is there anything apart from the digital dollar that underpins our current currencies?
No. It's our military.
It's our military.
It's the value of the military. When someone says it's backed by the full faith of the American government, that's really kind of cheeky way of saying, we patrol the Suez Canal, like it or not.
Well, yeah.
I mean, that's, and I mean, it's sort of kabuki theater. It kind of makes me laugh and I don't want to get off here, but when I hear people say, well, Bitcoin isn't backed by anything, I laugh. I'm like,
yeah, well, we'll come on to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency.
Sure.
Later on, at the moment. So, but at the moment, if we're talking, there's nothing underpinning it.
No.
What is there to stop the US just printing more dollars?
Well, and that's the scary part about doing a digital currency. See, the problem right now with doing paper currency is once you printed a $1 billion note, a piece of paper, the gig is up. It's like the Weimar Republic. I mean, the gig is up.
That's when you were using wheelbarrows in the 30s?
Yeah.
And the money to buy a loaf of bread took one wheelbarrow. By the end of the day, it was two wheelbarrows.
Exactly, and you paid employees twice a day, noon and the end of the day. And this is where this whole unit of measure thing really makes me a little uncomfortable, because it can just print into infinity. I mean, if you go back to the 60 Minutes interviews that Powell did and that Kashkari did from the Federal Reserve back during COVID, I mean, they sort of said the quiet piece out loud. Both of them, and specifically Kashkari, acknowledged we can print into infinity.
And that, of course, devalues everything.
Absolutely.
Now, at the moment, we are going through, I think the phrase that's been coined is stagflation.
Yes.
So everything is stagnant, nothing is growing, but prices are shooting up. Now, if we were to change our way of dealing, would that solve that particular current crisis?
No.
We're still going to be in the same.
I think there's two things that people have to accept. I think we're going to see inflation into perpetuity. Caused by climate change.
Yeah.
Okay. Water is, is the underpinning or the underlying factor of the next couple decades or into the future. So the reality of it is that we're going to be fighting over that, and that's going to cause food inflation.
Yeah.
That's going to cause all kinds of inflation. We don't know, it's kind of like squeezing a balloon in the middle. Which way is it going to go? We don't know which way it's going to go. The scary part about it is that the powers that be, the leaders of the free world, if you will, realize that at some point in time they're going to start having to subsidize everybody.
Wow.
Okay, not only are we looking at climate change, we're also looking at a world that within the next couple decades, we're going to have 50% of the world's working population is not going to be full-time employees anymore. So how are they going to feed their Sims? How are they going to pay their bills? And we live in a globalized consumerism economy. So it's not like people can go back to planting a garden. Making payments is making people crazy right now. I mean, you wake up every day and you've got a list of bills that you got to pay. So
yes, that's true.
How do you put money in people's pockets so that they don't go out in the streets and start banging on trash cans?
Yeah, which we are seeing increasingly for various reasons.
Sri Lanka.
Yes.
Yes.
My gosh, yes.
Yes.
Putin, obviously, he appears, it has been said that his agenda is to rebuild the USSR.
Yes.
And of course, the countries that he's trying to bring back in, Russia actually stepped out of the Soviet Union in the first place. It wasn't these countries that said, okay, Russia, we've had enough. It was Russia that said, right, okay, off you go, you're on your own. So he is now trying to drag that back in again, is what the pundits are saying. Would you agree with that assessment?
100%. But it's strategic.
Yeah.
He's focusing on food-producing nations.
Yeah, of course he is.
I mean, let's be honest. Controlling Odessa, the port of Odessa, is one of the most valuable assets that he could have. If you want to ship anything out of the Ukraine,
you've got to have Odessa.
You've got to have Odessa.
And this whole thing with the currency is all part of that.
Absolutely.
Part of that plan.
It's not about currency. It's about food.
It's about food. I think that is what people aren't picking up.
No.
But back to the currency side of things again. The US dollar seems to have not just gained the reserve currency in control, but it's controlling us.
Absolutely.
They are dictating how our banks work, and I have to say, it's none of their business where I get my vast amounts of money from, if only. We're talking just $10,000, which in today's climate is not very much. And they say, where did you get it from? Well, it's none of your business.
Yeah.
Is that normal with such dominant currency, or is that just a US hegemony thing?
It's a hegemony thing, but it's also a little bit of, for me, it's always been amazing to see America, which was a nation founded on anti-taxation, and now it's obsessed with taxation.
Taxation, yeah.
Okay,
fair enough.
The American Treasury Department knows that they can go to Kenya. They can go to sub-Saharan Africa. They can go any place and find American 20s and 50s and $100 bills. Yeah. What really irritates them is knowing that there are transactions going on that are not being taxed.
Oh yeah, they hate that. Yeah.
Yes.
Hence the dislike of Bitcoin, which we'll
get to that.
We're gonna shelve Bitcoin at the moment because we have decided is a series of 3 or possibly 4 programs about the global economy and how it affects us here in the Caribbean and Antigua and Barbuda, and which means that digital currency, cryptocurrency, especially like Bitcoin, needs hours. So they're going to be a program on their own. So hold that thought there.
Yeah.
But this is why they hate it.
This is why they hate it.
One of the reasons they hate it.
And this is one of the things that scares me about giving power to government.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm an old school conservative small government guy. Small G government guy. The IMF is obsessed with the idea of some sort of a digital currency for the West. Forget about the BRICS. The IMF looks at it, and they see this from a whole stack of reasons. But the top of the line is illicit activity. This is where the $10,000, where the $10,000 come from. Here's the scary part about a digital currency. And I'm not saying this happens like the flick of a switch and all of a sudden we're George Orwell 1984. We know that government acts kind of like Hemingway used to say about bankruptcy. Bankruptcy starts out slow and then sudden.
Yeah, fair enough.
So what ends up happening is by having a digital currency, we live in a world of big data.
Now, don't forget, I'm just going to say this one more time because people forget, we are not, when we talk digital currency, we are not talking what we think of as cryptocurrency.
Absolutely.
We are not talking things like Bitcoin.
No.
Digital currencies are still controlled by banks.
Absolutely.
Just to hold that little difference in your mind at the moment, and that one is really key to this discussion.
That is key to this discussion, because here's what happens. The IMF looks at it and says, if we are no longer doing business in paper dollars, there's no longer $20 bills floating all around the globe in 50s and 100s, we can't then, we can then shut off human trafficking, drug, guns, all of these things with this digital currency.
If only.
If only the world would succumb.
Yeah.
And that's what scares me. That in itself scares me, because something created with good intentions, the government always has the ability to somehow turn it around and twist it and use it against us.
This, I'm afraid, is something we've done through the whole of history. We invent something wonderful, and there is always somebody to turn it.
Nuclear.
Guns, no gunpowder. Gunpowder. But going back a little bit to the IMF, I mean, surely going from money to digital, why would the IMF think that that would make a difference? Everybody will find a way to use whatever they create.
And so this is what's really interesting about this conversation. A few months ago, or a couple months ago, I'm looking here, Kristalina Georgieva. She's, I guess, the head of the IMF at some level. April 21st, 2020, there was a big meeting of the heads of world banking leaders. Powell was there, and there was a big meeting. And during that meeting, she said, you know, the thing that scares her is that governments tend to kind of have knee-jerk reactions to problems, and they never see things down the road.
Fair enough.
You know, it's sort of the battle between the sensory personality types and the intuitive personality types. The intuitive personality types go, there's a train coming. The sensory personality types say, I don't see anything. Okay.
Yep.
So this obsession with switching over to a digital currency, they're not thinking about the next bounce of the ball. The next bounce of the ball is by default, we will create a global black market.
Well, that's what's going to happen.
It's going to happen.
And I'm not an economist, I'm not an expert, and even I think that's going to happen.
Absolutely.
We're like all these brains.
And this ties back to 50% of the global workforce being, or specifically the American or the Western workforce being, you know, disjointed from going to work in an 8-to-5 job. Now what happens is you end up people trading services for services, bartering services for services. I need a website built, you fix cars. You know, I mean, it's, you know, this is, and now you end up with kind of a situation like we had with Italy a decade ago, where their economy was in such a terrible situation, and they realized that 30% of their economy was black market.
And that is what is going to happen.
That is what is going to happen.
Isn't it? I mean, this is why people are turning to things like Bitcoin. And again, we'll come back to that one. We'll come back to that one.
Yep.
I think you mentioned George Orwell. I think we've gone way beyond 1984 already.
And
way beyond 1984.
This is what really creeps me out is that, you know, for people like us, we read George Orwell 1984 and we saw it as dystopic.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, I don't want to live in a world like that.
We're way beyond that.
The scary part about it is you have to realize there were people that read that book and thought, that's an interesting idea.
Wow. Now you've really scared me. I always found that book freaky. I find George Orwell's books very scary. But that was an aspect I kind of didn't think of.
Let me tell you a real life case of how you see that happen. This is going way back in history. I doubt whether very many of your viewers even remember this. But in 1984, the Super Bowl, United States football, not to confuse football, but 1984 Super Bowl, Apple Computers had a huge 1-minute TV commercial of a woman running down the aisle and a bunch of people dressed in gray suits, and she was dressed in red and trees. And there was a big, like, George Orwell presentation screen with a man speaking, and she throws this hammer and she breaks the screen. And the gist of it is that, you know, Apple was going to change the world. We were going to democratize information. We were going to democratize the world. Guess what? Apple is now a rent-seeking monopoly. Wow. So this is, you know, Steve Jobs had a dream of something democratic, and now we can't live without an Apple phone.
Oh, this is true. You know, if you don't answer your phone, people get very irate. You know, it must have been lovely when you didn't have to answer this blasted thing. Yeah. Occasionally I turn my phone off, and it's after the initial panic. It's kind of, wow, this is wonderful.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
And I read an article once that said that 30, 40 years ago, probably in the 80s, the aim of people was to acquire enough money, to work hard enough so that they didn't have to work all the time. They could have lots of free time.
No, that's over.
But that's over. Now you are sitting on a train with people working, people answering their phone at all hours of the night. We seem to have gone away from that completely.
And you're going to work until the day you die now.
Yeah, oh yeah, I think that's true.
Because what the goal of, if I don't know how many people follow the meetings in Davos, but the World Economic Forum, this ties into this whole digital dollar or digital currency thing. The World Economic Forum really sees this as you're going to be poor and you're going to like it. You're going to make payments forever. This is why
very depressing.
This is why we have this stagflation thing going on. It's going to get to the point where an automobile is going to cost $100,000 or $200,000. You're never going to own it.
Are we ever going to get out of this?
No. This is the Great Reset, and that's another thing for people listening. If you want to write this down, go Google the Great Reset. It's important for people to wrap their minds around what has happened. We moved away from a self-sustaining culture to a consumerism culture, and Putin knows that that's a weak underbelly of the world.
Well, some of the things I see around the world at the moment is very much a me, that we seem to have gone away from that societal love, that help for one another.
No.
And it's not just financial, obviously, but
what has happened
makes me sad.
What has happened is people now are in a money grab mode because in people's minds they see money is the way of getting out of their problems. It's their moat that they want to build around themselves. If I have enough money, if the world changes, I'm going to be okay. They're not thinking the bouncing ball far enough down the court, because the reality of it is we're going to switch to a digital currency. And now I'm going to tell you some really creepy, scary things that they can do with this.
Well,
we saw this through COVID. The problem with COVID was when we sent out stimulus, it was a shotgun blast stimulus. Everybody got a check. Well, that's why we have crazy inflation issues right now, because it created distortions. With a digital currency, I can send, based upon your tax classification and your tax return each year, I can send only to the farmers, only to the truck drivers, only to the school teachers, whoever I want to. I can send a subsidy only to them. The inverse of that is you get to retirement, you think you've acquired a lot of equity in your home, you've got it 75% the way paid for, and you sell that home, you put that money in your savings account or whatever, a money market account. The Federal Reserve looks at that money and they say, that's ours, you're just using it. And you're not using it adequately. Instead of sending out stimulus, we're going to change the game on you. We're going to have a negative interest rate on that money market account of 1% a month.
And they can do that?
Absolutely.
And this is because
it's digital.
It's digital.
You can't take the money out of the bank and go buy gold.
Yeah. This wouldn't change, though, if the BRICS nations or Russia and China developed a reserve currency. If they became the dominant currency, either in the East or took over, they're not going to change that, are they? Are we going to be seeing even more 1984 stuff? Not only will I have to prove that I'm not a crook.
This goes back to what I said earlier in the interview. It's about big data.
It's about big data. Yeah.
Where did you spend? What did you spend? Look, the gun show loophole in the United States, being able to go transact it, buy a gun for cash, it's over.
Well, I guess that's something.
Buying gold, it's over.
So we will no longer have control over what we spend, will we? No. Something I noticed every year, we try and have a little holiday, and we go to England for a couple of weeks, and then we don't see family. But one thing I noticed this year, when we went which year are we in? No, it's last year. I've lost my track now. When we had to go back because my mother died. One or two places, and I'm talking one or two places, would not accept cash.
Yes.
We went back this year, a year later. Now it was hard to find places that accepted cash.
Yes.
And I thought there were little old ladies around who just don't like spending that. What about people? I know that's a generational thing, and it's a little bit of a generalization as well. But not everybody in the world wants to use or can use or has access to the internet, access to a card. What about their spending power?
Well, see, and this is another thing that a digital currency can do is this can control immigrants with no social security numbers.
Right, yeah.
You show up in London, you're from an underdeveloped country, you show up in London today, you can get a cash job washing dishes in a restaurant and get by. When we go to a digital currency in a cashless society, you're in the outside looking in, friend.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's whether the government wants to take care of you or not. But this is also what empowers me, is the idea of the digital gypsy.
Yes. No.
Okay, we have 1% of our population. We always talk about the 1%ers, the super wealthy. There's going to be another 1% of our society, I guess. I'm only winging that statistic. We're going to have a group of people who are just going to opt out.
And this is how you describe yourself, a digital gypsy. Now, if this were to happen, we're talking about this would presumably devalue the dollar, it would devalue the pound, it would devalue all those existing currencies. Is this that would have that effect?
Yes, it would have that effect, but that's the goal.
That's the goal of the...
I mean, let's be honest. Since we went off the gold standard and the pound sterling, both of the U.S. dollar and the pound sterling have devalued 95% now.
I know, it's horrific.
So forget about worrying about that.
But what about the euro? I mean, we've seen the euro not necessarily a successful experiment, and I think Great Britain is so relieved they didn't stick with the euro. And this is very centrally controlled for some reason by the Germans. Nobody's quite sure how the Germans came to control this. What would this do to the euro? We've seen an attempt at a common currency.
Well, this goes back to what I said earlier about, will there be a U.S. digital currency? Will there be an IMF digital currency? Will there be a euro digital currency? This is still too opaque.
Right.
We don't know where this is all going to play out. I agree with you, going back in time when I was trading in Chicago back in the late 90s, I can remember the euro pit on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange was the biggest pit in the exchange. And I remember looking in that pit going, but what does it do? I've never touched a euro.
Yeah.
I mean, is it kind of, like you said, it's kind of a great mystery. Why did we create it? What did we, will they digitize it? I don't know. At the end of the day, it's really going to be a binary thing. It's going to be a Western currency and an Eastern currency. And I don't know what that's going to be yet.
And governments will have to choose.
That's right. Every government around the globe is going to have to choose. Whether you're in the business of buying natural resources or selling natural resources, every leader of every country around the globe is going to have to make a choice. Am I with the US dollar or am I with the BRICS? What's best for my country? What's best for the consumers of my country? What's best for the natural resource producers of my country?
Now we've run out of time, but one more key point to bring this to the real cliffhanger. Antigua and Barbuda, we have the XCD, the dollar. We are tied to the US dollar.
Yep.
We have a lot of input from China.
Yep.
What do we do? That is going to be...
Like I said, every leader of every country is going to have to make a choice.
And we're going to have to leave it there, Gary. This is part one of a series. As you can imagine, we have touched on things, we've got into things. This is going to run and run. But this is at least a three-part series when every couple of weeks when Gary is available, because he is a digital nomad and he travels around a bit, although Antigua is his home. Gary, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I'm really looking forward to part two.
Absolutely.
And you've scared me. Really scared me about things that I thought, okay, that's not so bad.
Well,
but it's really important that we understand how this will affect each and every one of us.
And one little thing, I don't want to take up a whole bunch more time, but one little thing, I'd want every listener to go do your own research.
Yep.
These are my opinions. This is one of the fatal flaws of the social media world that we live in.